So I think the first thing to understand is this is not a trade war in the way people typically understand trade wars. People understand trade wars as one country slapping some tariff over another country because of maybe security reasons.
Correct.
US doesn't trade with Russia because of security reasons. US has higher tariffs with China because they want to protect themselves. Countries want to protect their domestic industries once in a while, at least some industry. That is
Correct.
what happens.
Hmm.
You must understand that when global growth happens, or it lifts all boats, everybody does better.
Hmm.
But when the tide recedes, then some of the smaller players, the weaker players, get hit the most. We
Correct.
are one of the smaller, weaker players.
It's been more than 24 hours since US President Donald Trump announced his so called reciprocal tariffs. And in 24 hours, it has sent the geopolitics and geoeconomics across the globe in what could be seen as ripples and waves of a lot of consequences. With us joining today is our in-house expert Udit Mishra, who's the associate editor at the Indian Express, and he will help us break it down and explain it to us. What do these reciprocal tariffs mean, and what could be the consequences? Udit, thank you and welcome for joining us today. Uh,
Thanks, Flora.
starting off, there has been a confusion on what is the tariff rate exactly for India. Is it 26%? Is it 27%? What is the exact number and why this back and forth, if you can clarify for us?
Yeah, initially when the first announcement was made, U.S. President Donald Trump had put up a board for everybody to see, which had one set of countries, and India was the fifth in that lot. And that board said 26% was the reciprocal tariff for India. But later in the press releases, in the documents, formal documents that came out, it said 27%. So now everybody is going with 27%. And that's why the confusion happened, possibly because some typo. There are larger question marks on how Trump and his administration decided reciprocal tariffs, which is not such a scientific exercise as they have made it out to be.
Right.
So it's hardly surprising that some confusion on this number happens.
Absolutely. But Udit, now in the beginning itself, I said that it's been 24 hours and a lot has happened. Uh, Three key developments that have happened 24 hours in India and globally, if you had to lay it out for us.
So I think the first thing to understand is this is not a trade war in the way people typically understand trade wars. People understand trade wars as one country slapping some tariff over another country because of maybe security reasons.
Correct.
US doesn't trade with Russia because of security reasons. US has higher tariffs with China because they want to protect themselves. Countries want to protect their domestic industries once in a while, at least some industry. That is
Correct.
what happens. But in the pieces that I've written in the last 1 month, I've tried to explain this that, US President Donald Trump is not coming from that chain of thinking.
Hmm.
This is not a tariff war of the nature that uh, we want to sort of hold back one particular industry. Donald Trump wants to turn US into a manufacturing superpower.
Right.
He wants everybody to come to US and produce there. And it's not so much about everybody coming to US. He wants US to basically produce more with American workers
Correct.
or American robots. He
Oh,
doesn't care, but he
okay.
wants production to happen in US. So that is the first thing to understand. In which case, he is not putting tariffs to come to a point where he's protecting one thing or incentivizing something else. He just doesn't want that trade to happen. So if you look at the reciprocal tariffs, the way they have been calculated,
Yeah.
the guiding principle there is that we want to raise tariffs to a level where whichever country has a surplus over us, whichever country exports to US more, their exports should stop. So we'll put so much trade barriers. So it is like turning away from trade, as it were, altogether, not wanting to
Absolutely.
trade, in that sense.
Yeah.
So, and by logic, they will keep raising interest rate, tariff rate. So the first observation is that it is inbuilt. Nobody should take these tariff rates with the surety that they will not go up. If the
Okay.
guiding principle in US is that, or with Trump is that, he does not want a deficit with any country, which
Mm,
means that he doesn't want to have a imbalanced, in his view, relationship with another country.
mm.
He will keep raising these rates till such time that imbalance goes away, which means till that time your exports to US, India's exports to US come down, Vietnam's exports to US come down. So this is a very faulty understanding, which I see a lot of people saying right now in media, that this is in some way good for India because we have only been given 27% tariff and Vietnam is 34. They've been given 34 or higher or whatever because they were producing more. They were exporting more to US. So he's basically trying to negate each country. The more he's putting a tariff on is just shows that you were actually doing more trade with him. So that is the first thing. So for example, India has a trade surplus of 46 billion, which is to say that we export 46 billion worth of goods to US more than what we import from US. Now, if Trump wants to remove that gap, it basically means either he will force India to buy 46 billion worth of goods, American goods, so that the gap narrows to zero, or else he will put tariffs to such an extent and keep
Yeah.
raising them
Yeah.
so that those goods that Americans were purchasing from Indians become so
Correct.
costly that Americans say, let's not buy it from India.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And he's
Correct.
all this. So that is the first thing that you have to understand. The other is that inflation will go up across the world, right? Because basically tariffs are like a tax. They will raise prices across the board. To the extent that other countries also retaliate, this will just snowball. So you will have higher inflation, and this is a sad thing for global economy and every country, and
Of
for all
course.
households who have just come out of the COVID shock and high inflation in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war. And the
Absolutely.
third thing is growth will slow down.
Mm.
You know, now already the percentages have been going up in the last 2 3 days. Only derating has happened, and everybody now expects that 60% chance of US having a recession.
Correct.
These chances will increase for other countries also as they take the retaliatory steps, because it will raise prices for everybody. Growth will slow down. The world will enter a phase where overall growth is slow. Demand for exports anywhere in the world depends on growth. Higher growth means higher money in people's pocket. They demand things. When growth slows down, the demand for exports across the world falls. We will import less from Vietnam, and Vietnam will import less from Australia, whatever. All trade just depresses. So that's the third thing. So we are looking at a phase of fairly muted economic activity, fair amount of economic problems in every country, mostly concentrated in US, but US will spread out because US is such a big economy, its impact will be felt everywhere. So that's the prognosis.
Absolutely. So I think a pertinent point that you put across is it's not a trade war. Let's not look at like a tit for tat kind of a thing. But at the same time, how do you think New Delhi, because the Indian Commerce Ministry yesterday put out a statement saying that, we are still waiting and watching, and we are still contemplating how to go about this. How do you think New Delhi is going to, well, I can't say counter, but for the lack of a better word, how do you think New Delhi is going to deal with Washington now in the face of these tariffs?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to understand is that even policymakers in India and, well, every country must first understand this basic thing, that he's not actually looking for a deal the way it is understood that Trump is looking for a deal. You cannot say, I will sell this more, sell that less. Either you cut down all your tariffs, in which case India will have to deal with a lot of problems. For example, if he says, why don't you buy our corn? right? At absolutely zero tariffs. Why don't you let it enter? It will create problems for our farmers. So the Indian government has to understand what Trump is not looking for. He's not looking for a deal in the typical manner. He wants to cut down that trade, balance that trade totally. So the more important thing to my mind are a focus domestically, first of all, improving your efficiency. Add, people can look at the trade data, India's trade data. India's trade in the last decade has stagnated. We have not done well. Even when oil prices were low and global economy was fine, we did not really grow in terms of our export as much as we would have liked. Others really uh, uh, sped ahead. So first thing to look at is that if we have to go through this phase, we have to look at a scenario where we don't just depend on US, we look at other avenues. So try to strike a free trade deal or whatever you want to with US, but realize that US is not out to give you any benefits. You know, they don't understand. I mean, this US, this Trump administration does not understand there are any benefits from trade. It
Hmm.
sees trade as a negative. So you have to look at other partners. You have to deepen your ties with other partners. That is one thing. And secondly, internally, you have to make your country more efficient. India has to become more efficient at producing things, toys, goods, different things. And that means easier regulatory uh, framework, easier access to capital, money. For if you and I suppose decided let's start a company today, would that be possible? How
Yeah,
quickly can we start a company, and how quickly can we wrap up a company and start another one,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Those kind of things. Where will we get the access of money? How much regulatory cholesterol is there for us to deal with? Any such thing, and freedoms will come into play in this. This is something that very few people sort of understand. US became the global giant because it gave freedoms to its citizens and it recognized freedom of everybody, had a free play of market. That's why it became the biggest economy. And this is there in the criticism that they have about India, that we
Mhm.
have internet shutdowns, we have all kinds of arbitrary action which holds back trade.
Yeah,
If India wants to become a giant, economic giant, a trading giant, we must allow people's voices, we must allow things to happen. If we do not allow, for example, in our industry, in media, if
yeah,
you shut down everybody who criticizes the government or anything, it will just ruin the GDP that could have come from that. So
correct.
for every industry, that would apply.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, are you telling me that this is sort of a boon for India? That this is the moment when we get to iron out our creases when it comes to trade practices, and at the same time making friends elsewhere other than countries who are the US.
Yeah, I mean, I don't subscribe to the view that this was the one thing we were waiting for.
Hmm,
This is decidedly very negative for India.
hmm,
You must understand that when global growth happens, or it lifts all boats, everybody does better.
hmm.
But when the tide recedes, then some of the smaller players, the weaker players, get hit the most. We
Correct.
are one of the smaller, weaker players,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
When suppose you had 100 rupees today, you were spending it in one way,
yeah,
and that number was cut down to 50. Your
right.
chances are you will cut down the smaller expenses first,
Yeah,
right? Those smaller expenses are exports from India, right?
correct,
Or
correct,
things that people import from India. So,
correct.
first of all, we should recognize that this is not some great opportunity. This is a crisis. We must respond to it. We must rise, because we have, Prime Minister keeps saying that we reformed out of compulsion in 1991,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
This is now back to compulsion. The Prime Minister did not reform in the last 10 years. We
yeah.
were becoming increasingly protectionist, and now this is that compulsion. So,
Oh,
if this Prime Minister is also now going to get forced into becoming more free and open to trade out of this compulsion because they're shutting doors. So,
absolutely.
yes, this is an opportunity in that sense, in the sense that an opportunity is there in every crisis, kind of a thing.
Yeah. It's looking at silver linings in crisis, nevertheless. Before I let you go, Udit, the reciprocal tariffs sort of have sent ripple waves. Now, the thing is, how do you think or how do you foresee that in the near future or in decades to come, how is this particular chapter in the US history going to affect ties with India as well as the rest of the world? Because this is a time when, in a very plural society, geoeconomics and geopolitics go hand in hand. So, if you had to cite out three things that you foresee in terms of US India relations and US relations with the rest of the world.
So the first thing is is to, and this is first thing to understand, is that what Trump is doing is by a stroke of a pen. This is
Hmm.
not legislative change, and there's
Yeah,
a world of difference between that. It basically means that if the US Congress opposes Trump, even the Republicans come together and say, well, your understanding of trade is faulty, you don't understand why US became so great and you are just ruining it,
hmm.
they can oppose it. Courts can
Yeah,
bring it down. So all of this may just falter. If the prices rise, people may turn against Trump. And in the midterm elections that are due, I think, in 2026,
yeah,
Republicans may lose if they do not oppose, or else they themselves oppose. So all of this, first of all, the first thing to look out is whether there is appetite within US, both the people and the policymakers, for what Trump is doing, because he's just signing things right now. There's no
yeah,
legislative backing for it. So you can do it for a while, for 6 months. You'll ruin your reputation permanently. That he has already done.
yeah.
But whether the US comes back or not,
Hmm.
that is one thing. But so there is a very good chance that 2 years down the line, US may again open its doors. It may not get back its reputation, but at least it may open its markets again, saying that, okay, forget that whole episode. We are back. We agree with the overall trade logic. That is
Yeah,
one thing.
yeah,
Um, y- I would suspect that Europe is the most crucial element now. Europe accounts for 34, 35% of global trade. And the
correct.
shock that they cannot depend on US for either security or trade, or even for basic decency between allies,
Yeah.
has meant that Europe is now, led by Germany and France, is now saying we will spend, even if we have to borrow excessively, we will spend and become the giant that we can become.
Hmm.
So Europe will then. So the second thing to look out is what happens in Europe. Again, these are just conjectures right now. These are
Yeah.
what we are looking at. If Europe really gets up on its feet and says we'll run the system, there can be you can imagine a system where the rest of the world, US accounts for only 13% of global trade. The 87% is outside it. So led by Europe and Asia, which is again something 34, 35% of global trade, if they come together, there can be a prosperous, uh, world of trade. So that is, so where does India find itself in that? So it's not just about India US, because as I said, US is trying to cut down any trade imbalance. There's
Hmm.
not much to gain there, other
Hmm.
than saying that, okay, we'll also swamp our markets with American goods, which is likely to happen if that if Donald Trump forces India. We're likely to have more American cars and liquor and everything, coming into India.
Correct.
So Europe is the second bit, and the third bit is that, how do central banks in all countries, especially in India, or globally, how do they deal with this kind of a upheaval? Because as
Hmm.
I said, this tariff is an increase in prices without any increase in productivity, right? So your
Yeah.
costs have gone up across the board without any real productivity increase, right?
Correct.
So it will create a cost of living crisis for everybody. How do central banks do it? If they raise interest rates, they will bring down growth further. And we're already struggling with those kind of issues. So that is the third concern to look out for.
Absolutely. So, to take it away from you now, like you said, that it's Trump's entire uh, narrative is based on the fact that it has to be production, has to be in America. It's a bigger America first narrative. It's not a trade war, but at the same time, India is in crisis, but there are a few creases that we can iron out looking at the silver linings in this crisis. And of course, Globally, on a global scale, now Europe has this opportunity to, sort of bolster and amp up themselves, be it defense-wise and economically as well. Thank you for joining us today, Udit. Thank you for decoding Trump's reciprocal tariffs with us. Viewers, you can read all of Udit Mishra's articles on the official website, that is the indianexpress.com. And for more updates on Trump's reciprocal tariffs and its consequences and impact all over the world, stay tuned to the official YouTube channel of the Indian Express.